Today, there are few who don't know the name Disney. As a giant conglomerate, Disney has created films, TV shows, channels, theme parks, toys, and a variety of other products that have brought joy to children and adults alike all over the world. But the story of how Disney was created is certainly unlike any other company on the planet. A young boy, homeless and with pennies to his name, changed his life and started what would soon be a worldwide sensation worth $130 billion, the Disney Empire. Before Disney was a household name around the world, it was just the last name of a family in Chicago. Elias and Flora Disney had 3 children before giving birth to Walter Elias Disney on December 5, 1901. In 1906, when little Walt was 4 years old, the family moved to a farm in Marceline, Missouri. Life on the Disney family farm was challenging. While Walt's mother Flora was a teacher, Elias, his father, struggled to make enough on the farm to make ends meet for his large family of 7. Because of his financial frustrations, Elias was not a good father, and many reports state that he violently abused his 5 children. Only a few years later, in 1911, the Disneys left the farm behind and moved to Kansas City, Missouri. However, life in Kansas City wasn't much better. Walt was only 10 years old, and yet he was essentially working full-time to help provide for his family. Between selling newspapers for his father, sweeping floors, his paper route, and many other odd jobs, he barely had any energy or time for school. His teachers were worried that he would fall behind. Even when Walt was in class, he struggled to pay attention to the lessons. Instead, he spent his time drawing. His love for drawing started when his sister Ruth was hospitalized in Kansas City, and the young boy started drawing movie pictures to entertain her in her sick bed. And it wasn't just drawing that held his attention. Walt also became obsessed with any kind of entertainment. He had just befriended a fellow student, Walter Pfeiffer, whose family loved the theater. They introduced young Walt to vaudeville and motion pictures, and in no time at all, Walt was hooked. Walt had to keep his new love for the theater and entertainment a secret, as his father viewed it as an excessive luxury, though his enjoyment of the arts was short-lived. Only a few months after meeting the Pfeiffer family, Walter's older brother, Roy, ran away from their father and their home, just as his 2 older brothers had done years before. As Walt was then the only son at home, his father put more pressure on him to help around the house. But of course, Elias Disney was still angry, maybe even more so after his 3 sons had left. So he started beating Walt consistently and aggressively, hitting him with wooden planks in his carpentry studio. When Walt was 14 years old, he started to realize that if he wanted to change his life, he needed to start thinking about his future. His family was poor, and they didn't have money for a formal education, but he didn't want to end up lost like his father. Walt knew that his true passion was drawing, and because of his experience delivering newspapers for his father, he had seen plenty of cartoons published over the years. He decided then and there that he would try his hand at working as a cartoonist. Luckily for Walt, only 2 years later, when he was 16, his father ran out of money yet again and moved the family back to Chicago in the hopes of finding a new job. Walt continued working continuously at odd jobs around Chicago to both help his family and try to save money to start taking art classes. However, only a year later, he lied about his age and enlisted in the Red Cross to help with the war effort as the First World War broke out. It didn't seem like those things were going very well for young Walt. He was in a war, had no money, and certainly was not on his way to becoming a cartoonist as he had once dreamed he would be. When the war ended, Walt returned home but refused to go back to high school as he saw no merit in it. It was time, he decided, he would finally become an artist. He moved back to Kansas City on his own and applied for a job at the local newspapers, though no one would hire him. But he didn't give up. Instead, he applied for a job at a local art studio, and much to his surprise, was actually hired. It was there that he met fellow artist Ub Iwerks. The 2 were let go from the studio at the same time later that year, but because of their friendship and dedication to the craft, they decided to open their own company, Disney Iwerks. But the company only lasted a month before they ran out of money and Disney had to go back to the drawing board. He then got a job for a film company, where he learned about animation. Many say that this job was Disney's big break, And his new knowledge of animation and film is what would eventually lead to one of the largest companies on Earth. Walt practiced consistently, and eventually he was asked to create hand-drawn cartoon animations for several films the company produced. And in his free time, he even made his own cartoons in a studio he made in his garage. After hours and hours of work, Walt brought his cartoons to a local theater where they agreed to show them. He continued making films in his garage, and instead of creating similar cartoons to what was being shown in theaters at the time, he had an ingenious idea. He would create a series of animated cartoons based on traditional fairy tales such as Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, and Alice in Wonderland. They were a huge hit. By 1922, he had rented an actual studio and employed several other cartoonists to work for him. There was no doubt about it, Walt Disney was making his dreams come true. But he had no idea that it was only the beginning of high highs and low lows in his career. It's never all smooth sailing in business, and just when it felt like the only way was up for Walt, everything fell apart. His company dissolved and he was left broke, homeless, and with no idea what to do next. So he did what any young artist would do. He moved to Hollywood. It was July of 1923. Walt was only 21 years old and had only $40 to his name. And like many others who came before and after him, Hollywood was cruel to Walt. He couldn't find a job anywhere. Finally, after getting denied over and over and even trying his hand at acting, Walt decided he would go back to what he knew, making fairy tale cartoons in a garage studio. And it turned out to be one of the best decisions he ever made. He got his foot in the door at several Hollywood studios and was even contracted to create a series of films about a rabbit, which were an instant success. But sadly, he lost it all again when Charles Mintz, the man who had hired him for the job, stole his artists and kept the rights to the rabbit cartoon. In 1928, without a job or any prospects, Walt decided that he would create a new character that he would own. He settled on a mouse, Mickey Mouse to be exact, and got back to work trying to sell the first Mickey Mouse film to a production agency. So he released the film himself, and it was an immediate success with both audiences and critics alike. Mickey Mouse became a nationwide success, but Walt wasn't making any money. He had struck a deal with Universal Productions before releasing Mickey around the country, but they lied to him and kept the profits for themselves. Walt was determined to make it on his own and broke the contract. By then, he was in extreme debt, and even though he had made a deal with Columbia Pictures, Walt had a nervous breakdown due to the financial and creative stress he was under. It seemed like all his hard work and the many ups and downs of his career had gotten him nowhere, but fortunately, his luck was about to change. Walt took a huge risk in the 1930s. He created his first film with both color and sound, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and that risk turned out to change everything for the artist. When it was released in 1937, Snow White was the first animated feature film in the world, and it became the highest-grossing film of all time. It made over $8 million in the first year, which is equivalent to $100 million today. Walt finally paid off all of his debts, and he continued making feature films such as Pinocchio, Fantasia, and Dumbo over the next few years. He bought a studio, homes for himself and his parents, and was finally considered a success in his industry. But that didn't mean it was easy from then on out. World War II arrived, his mother passed away, and his films were consistently over budget. So Walt decided to take the Disney company public. He used the money to continue creating feature films, but he also had a new idea: a theme park in Hollywood. While Walt certainly didn't have enough money to create a theme park, he decided to take out a loan and make his new dream a reality. And in 1953, it finally happened. He started a television show to help fund the project, though many people thought he was crazy as TV entertainment was so new. But once again, Walt's risks paid off, because, as we all know, Disneyland was a complete and total triumph. There were a few bumps along the way, but Walt Disney knew how to work hard and make his dreams come true. Walt Disney died on December 15, 1966, though he would never see the absolute mega company that it is today. Luckily, he was able to see his company that he started with nothing become a national and even a worldwide sensation. Today, Disney is worth an unbelievable $130 billion. And to think that a high school dropout who started the company over and over again because of his love for cartoons is pretty unbelievable, but it's completely true. Hungry for another fascinating business story? Click on the following video to hear the crazy story about the brothers who created U-Haul by scamming their father.